Thank you so much for being here. I know everyone, Marjorie from Cahoots, that's Kate from Cahoots. Some people you may not know, our Deaf Artists Theatres Toolkit project manager is Anita Small, who's here. Our deaf community consultant is MacKinnon, who's behind the camera. And our external deaf consultant, Joanne Cripps, who will be presenting today.
I'm going to choose from the slide. I'm not going to be going over every point on this slide, but the points that I feel are important. When we think about cross-cultural interactions, conflict is actually something we shouldn't be afraid of. It gives us the opportunity when conflict arises to improve upon ourselves and gives others the same opportunity. When we look at number 2, intense feelings, how a person feels in relation to others. So if you're thinking of majority culture and a person, so for example, if I happen to belong to a minority culture, what are my feelings when I'm interacting in that group? And when we talk about culture, we can think of any culture. For today's workshop, we're focusing specifically on deaf and hearing interactions cross-culturally. Disconfirmed expectancies. So when we look at deaf people and hearing people, a hearing person who has never met a deaf person before may not know what to expect or how to interact. They might feel like they need to help the deaf person. There's a feeling of, it's a new experience I haven't had before, what do I do? I will be discussing the framework, so you'll have a better idea of what I'm referring to as we go on. And I don't want you feeling that as you're listening to this, that your approach has been wrong or you're doing something wrong. That's not the intention of the workshop. The intention of the workshop is to offer you a variety of perspectives and know that there's always room for improvement. And that applies to me as well. Ambiguity is what I'm going to speak about next. When we look at language discourse, so if we're referring to American Sign Language and the way that deaf people engage in discourse, we start off with our main point, which is very specific, and then we generalize. When we think about English discourse tends to start off more vague, and speakers and users of the English language know that they will wait and the point will come. The main point will be arrived at. A deaf person would look at that same English discourse and say, get to the point already. This is too vague. And therein lies a difference between ASL discourse and English discourse, the ambiguity. And that takes us into knowledge areas and language. When we think of knowledge areas, we're talking about the natural acquisition, whether that's environment, friends and family that we socialize with. Now we'll talk about time and space. When I think about time, people have coined the phrase deaf time. But we need to look at why that phrase has come to be and where that's come from. I can give you a concrete example with the School for the Deaf in Milton. At that time when I was teaching, it was not a visual environment. There was sign language within the school, but a sound system was used even though it's a school with deaf children in it. That time most of the teachers were hearing, and after 1992, schools were forced to hire more teachers who were deaf. Upon the hiring of deaf teachers, there were more cross-cultural conflicts that arose. the alarm for recess would ring, indicating it was time to go back to class. So the hearing teachers and their students would make their way back to the classrooms while the deaf teachers would still be out in the play yard. And they would be late arriving back to class. And there came to be this idea that, oh, the deaf teachers were lazy or they weren't being attentive. But it was actually that the environment was not conducive or deaf friendly. When we talk about space, I'm going to give the example of assigning space because we're using a visual language. We need to have space when we communicate with one another. So let's say if Catherine and Anita were approaching me and the three of us were having a conversation, people approaching from the sides, well, I'm going to ask you, what would they do? Would they stand and wait before they could wait until we finished our conversation before passing through? Would they duck down and walk between us while we were conversing? Or would they just walk through? What would they do? What do you think? You would just walk through. That's the correct answer. You're right. In a cross-cultural context, I'm going to talk about language and the importance of eye contact in deaf culture. And I'll give the example of text messaging etiquette. If I was chatting with a hearing person and they pulled out their device to check a message in the middle of our conversation, it would be considered rude. Appropriate cultural etiquette, if this person was receiving an important message, let's say that somebody's expecting a baby to be born, is they would let me know, and that would be satisfactory to me. I would now know why they needed to check their message, but they would need to let me do that, let me know that beforehand. So it's that person's responsibility while we're having our conversation to let me know why they had to check their message. About a month ago, I happened to be in a store with my two grandsons. One is 5 years old and the other is 3 years old. They're both hearing and they're learning sign language. Yes, my two grandchildren. I've got the gray hair to prove it. So again, one is 5 years old and the other is 3 years old. And they've been learning sign language. My sister, who also happened to be with us, who's hearing, she can sign pretty well. We happened to go to the store. And I had taken them to the store because I wanted to ask them what they wanted to buy for their baby sister. Did they want to buy a doll or get some chocolate? But what happened while we were in the store, my sister, who's hearing, took it upon herself to do the interpreting in that interaction. Therein was a conflict. I'm trying to teach my grandchildren sign language, and as soon as she spoke, they stopped looking at me and stopped signing. My sister realized that right away, and she stopped speaking and started to sign again. And when the children did that, they saw her signing, they responded to the sign language. So again, once they saw her, that she had stopped speaking, they looked to her and she started to sign, and the two grandchildren started to sign again. So we need to think about what's happening in an environment. Sound is powerful and will create a significant imbalance. So I want to ask you about rituals. What's a ritual that occurs for you in your lives?
I guess how I wake up every morning to the sound of my alarm clock.
Mm-hmm. What I'm thinking of is something you could do up to 100 times a day without even thinking of it.
Like when you brush her hair out of your face, or?
Okay, that's a ritual. I'm thinking of thank you. The act of saying thank you. I think in the hearing world is an act that happens every day. Somebody hands you something, you say thank you. They give you something, you go through this ritual of saying thank you to the point of annoyance, I'm sure. So that's something that occurs. So when we're teaching deaf children about the hearing world, we remind them of that etiquette. I had boarded a plane and all the passengers were seated on the plane. The stewardess was going down the aisle, making sure that everybody had, or asking if they wanted headsets. And to each person, the stewardess would say, thank you. And I was calculating that there was about 300 passengers on that plane, meaning she had to say thank you 300 times. I'm going to talk about hierarchies among individuals. If I use an example from the hearing world, or when we think about English-speaking world in a North American context, what's important in terms of hierarchy is status quo, or status. Does a person have a degree? Are they a doctor? Do they have their PhD? So what letters follow your name becomes a symbol or recognition of hierarchy and status. An example of that would be the Nobel Peace Prize. Just on this morning's news, there were 2 individuals who were recognized for their work in fields of science, and they were honored with Nobel Peace Prizes. So again, that's a recognition of status. So the opposite is true in the deaf community. It's about your contribution. So for example, if we use Catherine as an example, we would recognize her for the work that she's done for the deaf community in theatre and film. And I'll use TIDFAF, the Toronto International Deaf Film and Arts Festival. Catherine has had a key role in that, and her contributions would be recognized. We're not looking at a degree, we're looking at what has she done for the community. If we use Anita Small, who's here today, she's a hearing individual, yes, but if we shared her background with you, we would again look at how she's contributed to the deaf community, what she's done for the deaf community. When we think of cross-cultural interactions, it's important to think about learning styles, whether somebody's learned, how they've learned from the school, from their family, and the different styles of learning. Some people may identify as visual learners, whereas others may be auditory learners. An example I can use from my personal experience is grant writing. So I would go over the grant, keeping in mind English is my second language. I would have a meeting with a potential funder, and we'd make sure we have an interpreter booked for those meetings, and we'd go over the details of the grant, because I want to go through that to make sure that how I retain information, I want to make sure that I'm on the same page. In talking with Anita about, let's say, that specific grant, she had expressed to me that it's, for her comfort level and her learning, it's better for her to get information about the grant in English, in her first language. Whereas for me, I want to have access to that information in American Sign Language. And that's not just my experience. That would be similar for other deaf people too. So let's say a deaf person was attending a lecture or presentation, and they weren't comfortable with all of the information that was being conveyed. I might have better luck conveying that information to that deaf person from ASL. So taking that information and imparting it to them in a way that they could retain it because it's their first language. Something culturally you'll notice as well as a community is that deaf people will ask more questions in terms of trying to access information. And the reason being is that everything is so auditorily based. People's access to information, facts, news comes in an auditory form, and deaf people don't have that same opportunity to access information. So you might notice that if you're in a group of people and there's deaf people attending, there might be a tendency to be asking a lot more questions.
I had a question about sort of going back a bit when you were talking about hierarchy. And one of the things I'm most interested in discovering for myself today is a deeper understanding of culture. So you talked about hierarchy and deaf culture being a certain kind of thing, and that made culture seem like it was monolithic. Is deaf culture monolithic? Or like if I came from Regina and I didn't know anyone in Toronto, would I feel like I was in the same culture? That's not the best way of asking the question, but the best I can do.
When you're asking about deaf culture, and where it emerges from, I would say schools for the deaf. So if you have a deaf person who has been placed in a hearing school, they haven't had exposure to deaf culture yet when they're mainstreamed. Compared to a person attending a school for the deaf, where they have that natural acquisition of language and culture on a daily basis. So that person has a sense of who they are, a sense of belonging to the community, a sense of their cultural identity. That's something, if they've gone to school in those early years at a school for the deaf, they've had exposure and acquisition. So I'm not talking about deaf people born to deaf parents, which happens, but I'm talking about deaf children who start attending schools for the deaf upon ages 5, 6, 7. And they'd be surrounded by other deaf children. Whereas when you have a lone deaf child placed in a hearing school, mainstreamed, they have not had exposure to deaf culture. There's nothing in that environment informing them of their cultural identity, so they don't have that exposure. That's missing for them experientially. So they have a different experience with deaf culture than would the person who's attending a school for the deaf. So students who've been mainstreamed, it might not be until their adult years when they start to acquire deaf culture and their language. And they get that exposure from socializing within the deaf community, from attending various social events, sporting events. So I hope that answers your question.
I don't think it's possible to comprehensively answer my question, and this gives me much more information to understand the distinction between types of deaf experience, which is really useful to understand, and I can comprehend what you're saying very easily. I was trying to get at the idea of whether or not those who share a deaf culture, whether that culture itself is monolithic, pan-Canada, pan-North America, Japan, Western countries.
When you're asking about deaf people in Canada, culturally, yes, we have similarities. But if you were unpacking us as individuals, you've got, let's say, deaf people from the LGBT community. You've got deaf people who would identify as being more grassroots. I don't know if grassroots is the correct terminology, so I want to be careful with that. So you've got various subgroups within the deaf community, so that we're not all alike. Do we have a shared lived experience? Yes, in terms of being people who have a hearing loss. We have a similar history and experience of oppressions against us. And those oppressions still occur to this day. One of them is not allowing or recognizing the use of sign language for deaf people. I started learning sign language when I was 5 years of age. So 0 to 5 years old, if you can imagine, I had no exposure to language. My parents lived north, and oral method of communication was taught to me. So I didn't actually have exposure to sign language. And so that oral communication meant it was one-way communication. Communication was coming to me, but there wasn't a place for me to be able to express myself. And it wasn't until that I was exposed to other deaf people that my horizons were broadened greatly as a deaf human being. So again, when we think about students, as I mentioned, who are mainstreamed, they don't have that exposure to language until they're much older, until their young adult years. That's a result of oppression, and it's because our society today still does not recognize the importance of sign language for our deaf children. You'll meet deaf people who, have an anger about what's happened to them because of the different situations they've had to occur based on barriers. When a person has exposure to their language and culture, you have a full life. The information here is from Dr. Paddy Ladd from London, England. He wrote a book entitled Understanding Deaf Culture. It's quite a volume, I have to say. It's quite in-depth, and summarized it down to one page. I'm going to, for the next portion of the workshop, give you different examples. As I mentioned before with ASL Discourse, as we're explaining, we tend to give examples. And that just makes it easier for people to visualize what we're talking about rather than just going ahead with a full-on explanation. I'm going to make use of examples. So we're going to focus on the medical dimension and use of terminology in discourse. And again, this is from the medical establishment. I have a true story based on facts. When my daughter was in the hospital, she'd given birth to her baby. The doctors and the medical staff had put high risk on my daughter's baby's medical chart. High risk. Again, I repeat, high risk of being deaf. And that was the language that was used. And I thought, wow, to use that language, when what research and statistics have shown us is that 90% of babies are born to hearing parents. And they put high risk on her daughter's chart because my daughter was born to deaf parents. And yet we have the statistics to back it up, 90%. 90% of deaf babies are born to hearing parents. Yet still, the medical establishment put high risk on the chart. So that's a medical model that we've been forced to work with. And the term risk has a negative connotation. Why couldn't they use language like there's more a chance of? Again, I don't like the word risk. So a baby's born deaf, and now the nurse and the doctors have to let the parents know. And they come to them and they say, oh, we've got some very sad news for you. Unfortunately, we have to tell you that your baby is born deaf. And what that does is prolong the grieving process for the parents. And there's this negative attitude around it that, oh, they can't hear, they're deaf, they can't do things. Why don't they take the approach and say, your baby's born deaf. This is taking you on a new journey, and you'll have some new responsibilities along the way. You can expose your child to language, they'll meet deaf leaders, and it's changing it from a negative view into a new journey that they're going to go on. Next is the social welfare dimension. And this is related to attitudes within various systems and structures. So oftentimes, professionals meet a deaf person and say, oh, you're deaf, and they're encouraged to go on ODSP, Ontario Disability Support Program. And the attitude is that, ooh, you're going to have a hard time finding employment, so this is probably the best route for you. And there's a bit of coddling and around that. So yes, there's a higher unemployment rate for deaf people. That should not automatically elicit a response then, oh, well, you're deaf, so you should just go on ODSP. There needs to be more encouragement for work training programs. If we go back to the year 2002, there were approximately 300 deaf individuals who were on ODSP at that time, in 2002. At that same time, there was an employment support program. And there was 117 deaf people who were connected with that program. So you've got 300 deaf individuals on ODSP, and 117 with the employment training program. And these were separate from one another. Last year, you won't believe the difference in numbers, there were 1,600 people, deaf individuals on ODSP compared to 300. And the employment program, there were 11 deaf individuals. And again, that's a result of attitudinal barriers within the system. Next, the human rights dimension. They say that deaf people have a right to interpreters and access, but sometimes that can cause more harm than good. So we have the Ontario Disabilities Act, the AODA, and what that act talks about is a deaf person's right to having interpreters, which on one hand can seem fine, but there's nothing in that act that supports or states deaf children's right to language, deaf children's rights to sign language. If we look at places in the north, they have absolutely no access to sign language interpreters. So if you can first access an interpreter, then you can have access to your rights. But you can't have one without the other. So, I mean, while the Act may state these things, it has absolutely no teeth. Currently, in the province of Ontario, there are 4,300 deaf children who are placed in mainstream settings. And again, these are in Ontario schools. So some of these children may be on their own in a school, or you may have 2 or 3 deaf children within a hearing school. Of that group, 93% of those children are forbidden to use sign language. But from a human rights perspective, they say, well, these deaf children are included. Their rights are being met. And what they're not seeing is that these children are being deprived of language and culture. With the linguistic minority dimension, this does not only apply to American Sign Language, but also can be applied to other spoken languages, French, German, Spanish. In the United States, in their school systems, English at one time was the only language recognized. It's only been more recently where Spanish language has been recognized within the school system. Until then, Spanish was not recognized. It's been more recently added. When we think about deaf children who are mainstreamed, they're faced with language oppression and language genocide. And I'm talking about deaf children in mainstream schools who have no exposure to their language. And it is, in fact, a language genocide. So they're being deprived of their language, and it's a language oppression. And we refer to it as a genocide. When you look at schools for the deaf, children have exposure to their language. They're in a signing environment. So what's important there is a bilingual approach where they have sign language and exposure to English literacy. Deafhood, I'm going to talk to you about what that means, and it includes all aspects of a deaf person's life, the way that childhood includes aspects of a child's life in their world, whether that's their home, what they eat, their environment, school, their friends. Deafhood is very similar in that way. It includes the language that we use as a community, sign language, our cultural norms, how we socialize, sports, theater, arts, deaf events. Deaf community as a whole tends to be collective in nature rather than individual. So if a group of us were having a discussion about something, what we would do is check in with other deaf people to make sure we're on the same page. And that's an example of how we're collective. We have literature in the form of ASL stories, poetry, theater, and again, all of that is accessed and conducted in sign language. We have a history very specific to us as a community. So for example, when the first deaf school was founded, so our history includes a lot of the firsts. And we'll have those stories as well that share our history. So when we look at ASL, American Sign Language, and its roots, where it originated from, how did it come to be? Its roots originated in France. That's right, from France. But I need to mention Martha's Vineyard, which we've also referred to as Deaf Island. In 1958 was the last deaf person living on that island. And that was 1958. That island had a mix of both deaf and hearing people who lived amongst one another. They used sign language, There hasn't been research done in terms of looking at what their sign language looked like. But there was when I mentioned France, a gentleman by the name of Leclerc who came to the United States to teach in the School for the Deaf in Connecticut. So at that time, there was no school on Martha's Vineyard. No schools at all. And the deaf people from Martha's Vineyard had to go to the School for the Deaf in Connecticut. So what those students did is they learned how to read and write. They went back to the island, and they in turn taught the hearing people how to read and write. So at that time, there was ASL being used amongst the people at Martha's Vineyard, between deaf and hearing people. It's just a little bit of the history. I'm not going to go into detail. And again, that's recognizing within deafhood our historical context.
If I'm trying to think of a front of house related question, if a person comes to our box office and uses sign language, because not all of our staff know sign language, would it be appropriate to have a pen and paper handy in case writing is easier?
That would be absolutely appropriate. After break, I'm going to teach the group a few important signs, and some of it is related to the work that you do. Some deaf people will use their voices and speak for themselves. So if you're communicating with that deaf person, just take a moment. If you notice maybe that person wants to use their voice, proceed with that. If they gesture for pen and paper, do that. And if they use a little bit of signs and want your eye contact, follow that. So sort of follow their lead that way. What's really important, what I really want the group to take away today, it's really important not to ask a deaf person, can you hear? Or can you lip read? Really, please avoid those two questions. So follow the cues of the person in front of you. If they look like they're gesturing for pen and paper, or you see that they're using sign language, or they're choosing to use their voice, follow their cue and go from there. Okay. So we're going to just take a short break, and when we come back, I'm going to teach you some American Sign Language.